Well, good morning, Zion Missionary Church.
Good morning.
When Jay called me a few weeks ago and asked if I'd be willing to speak today for Jon, I couldn't wait for this day to come. And by the way, thank you, worship team, for leading us in our worship. One of the songs that was sung this morning will go perfect with the message, and I always appreciate the efforts that a worship team puts in to kind of prepare the atmosphere for the preaching of God's Word. Well, I'm glad to be able to fill the pulpit today for Pastor Jon. I can fill it probably a little better vertically than he could, but not quite so well horizontally. All right. Pastor Jon, the pastor with the unique physique. And I do count it a privilege this morning to be able to just give he and Amy some rest and well-deserved relaxation today. And 30 years, Jay, is that what I was told? That Pastor Jon, you're celebrating his 30th anniversary here? My goodness. Yeah, that's something to clap about. That speaks very well of Jon. You don't stay somewhere 30 years if you don't like where you're at. But it also is a tribute to you. The fact that he's loved being here for 30 years and he's stayed here, that's a tremendous tribute to you. Give yourselves a hand this morning. Now, is there still people here that were here 30 years ago when he started? Does anybody remember? Let me see those hands. Wow, look at that. Thank you for your faithfulness and your loyalty to the Zion Missionary Church and to the Lord and to Pastor Jon over that. That's quite an accomplishment of loyalty. We thank you for that. Who is this guy standing in front of you? Well, for 43 years, I was a minister with the Missionary Church denomination, 10 years as a youth pastor, and then 33 years as a senior pastor. In June of 2024, I retired after having served for 10 years at the Camden Missionary Church. I served as their senior pastor. And when I retired, I did not retire from serving the Lord and from ministry. I'm hoping to do that as long as He gives me my next clear thought, my next breath, and my next heartbeat. I'm hoping to serve the Lord till I go to my grave, or He comes back first, and that would be fine with me too. All right, either way, for me to live and to die is gain. All right, for me to live is Christ and to die is gain. And now, currently, I have 2 part-time jobs that I'm doing. I serve as the licensing coordinator for the Missionary Church North Central Region. I help candidates obtain their ministerial license with the Missionary Church denomination. And it's a part-time administrative position that I do now. Love to do that. Training, coaching, primarily young candidates who are wanting to be involved in ministry. I do that now. And I also went from being the senior pastor of the Camden Missionary Church to being the church custodian. And so now I clean our 2 buildings. I clean the church building and then our outreach center. And I do maintenance on those 2 buildings. And I do that. I also teach adult Sunday school class at the church. And I try to find time whenever I can to mow my own grass. How many of you know what I'm talking about? Holy smokes. All this rain. We got 3 days coming in now this next week. Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, they're saying. And I try to fit in mowing my grass. But it's we'll get her done eventually. I want to preach this morning on Romans chapter 8, verses 28 and 29. That's where I'm going to start. And Jay said I had to have you out of here by 1 o'clock, so... All right, no, you're not going to miss your lunch if you eat a late one this morning. All right. Romans 8:28 is one of the best loved verses in the entire Bible. It's a verse that I have come back to many, many times. I believe it is one of the best loved verses, but I also believe it could be one of the most misunderstood verses in the Bible. And so what I want to do is I want to shine just a little bit of a light onto this verse as to what it really means. All right? What's this verse mean? In Romans 8:28, in the New International Version, it says, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." It reads just a little differently in the King James Version. In the King James Version, it says, "And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to his purpose." The first thing I want you to notice, and you should have an outline in front of you, is the promise. All things work together for good to those who love God and to those who are called according to his purpose. But as we think in terms of that tremendous promise, there are some problems with that promise, and it's not that the problems are with the promise, it's that there are some problems in misunderstanding what the promise is. All right? Some people get confused because of a few things here. First of all, Paul says, we know that all things work together for good. We are confident. We have the assurance that all things work together for good. Well, most of us would probably have to confess that maybe, just maybe, we are not quite as sure as Paul was about that. All right? And that can be a little bit of a problem. The other two problems that we have here is a definition of terms. In all things. Because some people have misunderstood that, and they believe that this verse is saying that all things are good. That is not what this verse says. This verse says that all things work together for good. That's an entirely different thing. You see, when Adam sinned in the Garden of Eden, there were a lot of bad stuff that entered our world that you cannot call good. You can't call those things good. Sickness is not good. Cancer is not good. Murder is not good. Adultery is not good. Suicide is not good. The death of a child is not good. It's not good when a policeman is shot and killed by a drug dealer. That's not good. Child abuse and child neglect are not good. Abortion is not good. And I could go on and on and on. This verse is not saying that all things are good. It says that all things will work together for good. You see the difference there? There's a major difference. In 2020, I contracted COVID. How many of you contracted COVID during the COVID years? It was the sickest I had ever been in my life. But I knew they said that the process of going through COVID, you were looking at 10 to 14 days, and then you'd probably be okay. And so I kept thinking, I'll tough this out. And I was counting down the days until that you'd get that 10 or 14 days, I'd get in that range to where it would be cured. And I wasn't getting better, I was getting worse. So finally I said to my wife, take me to the hospital. We went to the hospital. I was so weak I could hardly get out of the car. They came and got me with a wheelchair, and they wheeled me into the emergency. I told them, I said, I'm sure I have COVID. They ran all these tests on me, and they said, you do have COVID. They hooked me up to an IV, and they started pumping steroids into me. And after about 2 hours, I started feeling a whole lot better. But after about 2 hours of being in the emergency room, the doctor who was in residence that day, he came into my room and he said, Dave, why didn't you tell us you were diabetic? And I said, because I didn't know I'm diabetic. He said, you're diabetic. Your A1C, do I have any diabetic brothers and sisters here? All right, you know what I'm talking about. He said, your A1C is 10.5. That is high risk for a heart attack or a stroke. And he said, who's your family doctor? I said, I don't have one. He said, well, I cannot release you from the hospital until you have a family doctor, and you will be coming under the care of a family doctor for your diabetes. And then he said, if we'd have known you were a diabetic, we wouldn't have pumped all these steroids into you because it's the worst thing we could have done for you. Well, I felt a whole lot better after they did it, even though I wasn't supposed to have that stuff. I don't know what was in that concoction, but it was pretty good. And I went home. After a couple hours, I felt pretty good. You know, you see, all things are not good. COVID is not good, but God worked that out so that COVID led to my being diagnosed for diabetes. I've been on the care of my diabetes under medical care ever since then. Anybody ever heard of metformin? Yeah, you guys know what I'm talking about, the metformin. Type 2, not a type 1. Some may be here type 1 diabetic, but type 2. And then in October of 2024, we started having some issues with my wife's health. And my wife, Nancy, is here today. We will be celebrating 40 years of marriage in November. And she's here. In October of 2024, we started to notice some things about her that wasn't quite right. Physically, mentally, there were some things that just weren't quite right. And so we went all these different places trying to figure out what is she experiencing. And after going through neurologists, neuropsychologists, all these different specialists, they diagnosed her in July of 2025 as having Parkinsonian syndrome. It's a very rare form of Parkinson's. It is not Parkinson's, but it's a rare form of Parkinson's. And we have been dealing with that ever since. It's not really what I had planned, and it's not what she had planned for our retirement years, but God had other plans. And we believe that in all things, He's going to work it together for good. And He already has started to. We've had a ministry that He's opened up to us to Parkinson patients. And we've met some tremendous people. And the church in Camden, many of the women there have just been so great to us. And they've taken Nancy to different appointments and different things like that. They helped out with our scheduling. And so we've seen that even in Parkinsonian syndrome, God is working that together for His good. And we praise Him for that. The Bible never asks us to pretend that tragedy isn't tragedy or to pretend that our pain is not real. The Bible doesn't ask us to do that. Our pain is real. It's very real. The point is, we must see the active involvement of God working in our lives. In John chapter 5, verse 17, Jesus said this to the Jews. He said, my Father is always working. Up to this very moment, my Father is working, and I am working too. Our Father is always behind the scenes working all things together for our good. Of all the questions that trouble us in this life, I think it's the question of why. Many times I find myself saying, God, why? I don't understand. I don't understand. You might have heard someone give you this counsel, which is not biblical, that you should never ask God why. Show me that one in the Bible. What I find when I go through my search of the why question is, I see Jesus Christ hanging upon a cross on the 9th hour, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and it says in a very loud voice, he cried from that cruel cross, my God, why? Why have you forsaken me? Jesus asked his Father the why question because he didn't understand the whole process that was going on. We don't understand the whole process. We have a very finite and limited mindset. You know, that song that was sung this morning, his ways are not our ways, his thoughts are not our thoughts. For as high as the heaven is above the earth, so are his ways higher than our ways, and his thoughts are higher than our thoughts. We are limited. The only person that can understand who God is God himself. We can't do it. We can't do it. And so I have a book that is a part of my library. And it's a book that came out in 1993. It's by Dr. James Dobson, remember, founder of Focus on the Family. We're going back a few years. He just recently died, by the way. But Dr. Dobson, the book is When God Doesn't Make Sense. Interesting thought, isn't it? When God doesn't make sense. Holding on to your faith during the hardest times. That's the subtitle there. Dr. James Dobson, When God Doesn't Make Sense. How many of you know that God asked many people in the Old Testament primarily to do some things that didn't make sense? Noah, build me an ark when it hadn't even rained before. Build an ark. Abraham, take your son Isaac up on Mount Moriah and sacrifice him there as a burnt offering to me. This was the Isaac that was supposed to be from his descendants. They were supposed to number as numerous as the stars in the sky and as numerous as the grains of sand on the seashores. And God says, take him up there, offering him, sacrifice him as a burnt offering to me, which we know Abraham never had to do that because of the ram that was caught in the thicket. But think about what Abraham's thinking. Here God has told me that I want to have all these descendants and everything, and now he's telling me to sacrifice my son. How can you have descendants from a dead son? Doesn't make sense. How about marching around Jericho to see walls fall down? Not your normal battle tactic. We're not using that one over in the Iran war. Strange. How about the one with Gideon, where they were going up against the Midianites, and God says, make sure you bring these jars with you, these clay jars, and make sure you have your trumpet. And at just the blowing of the trumpet, then I want you all to break your jars. Blow the trumpet and yell, for the Lord and for Gideon, and you'll defeat the Midianites. That's kind of strange. Kind of strange. Not the way it's normally done. All those were illustrations of faith. This verse is true of only Christians. This is not a verse that people who do not believe in Jesus Christ can claim. Neither is it a verse that we as Christians should use on people who do not believe in Jesus Christ. It doesn't apply to them. This verse, that all things work together for good, it only applies to those who love God and those who are called according to his purpose. It's not a blanket promise made to the entire world. It's not made to that. Well, another thing that we have to learn about this is we have another definition that's hard. We have to define our terms. In all things, we have to define that one. But we also need to define the word good. And I want you to know that the way we define good and the way God defines good is not the same. When we think that all things are going to work together for good, we think in terms of our creature comforts. Everything's going to work out to our being comfortable, and things are going to be convenient. That is not what the word good means. You see, when we define good, we think it equals health, happiness, solid relationships, money in the bank, gas in our vehicle, food in our refrigerator and in our freezer, a nice place to live, a surgery that is successful, your marriage is doing well, your kids are honor roll students. You've just heard a great doctor's report. See, that's the way we define good. All things are working toward our creature comforts. That's not the way God defines good. It's not the way He defines it. Good to us, we define it as a better set of circumstances. And so, we have a promise. We have the problems. Now, we have a purpose. It's given to us in verse 29. In verse 28, it ends with, who have been called according to His purpose. Unfortunately, we quote Romans 8:28, but we don't quote Romans 8:29 with that verse. Romans 8:29 explains Romans 8:28, because Romans 8:29 tells us what God's purpose is. Here's the purpose. For those God foreknew, He also predestined to be conformed to the likeness of His Son, that He might be the firstborn among many brothers. The purpose of God for our lives as His children, His purpose is always the same. It is to conform us into the likeness of His Son, Jesus Christ. When He saved you, from the day He saved you till the day that you will die, that is His purpose for you. That is what He is going to be doing every day in your life. He's going to be conforming you into the likeness of His Son, Jesus Christ. Now here's what I want you to hear. We define the word good as creature comforts, a real good set of circumstances in our life. That's not how God defines good. I'm going to tell you how God defines good. God says it's anything that comes into your life that makes you more like Jesus is good. Anything that comes into your life that makes you less like Jesus is bad. So that in all things that He's working together for our good, that all things can include good things and bad things. It can include sickness and suffering and persecution and all these other things that come into our lives that are necessary for God to work those things together for our ultimate good and for His ultimate glory. It's not always an easy process to go through. It's not always easy. Oh, can I go to 11:30, Jay? I'm just getting started.
Let's go.
All right? All right. One of the story in the Bible that is the greatest illustration of this whole idea of God working things together for good is the Old Testament story of Joseph. His story is the perfect example of Romans 8:28. And it's found in Genesis chapter 37 through 50. All right? out of all the Bible characters in the book of Genesis, there is more space devoted toward Joseph than any of the other Bible characters. Chapter 37 through 50. And don't worry, I'm not going to preach on all those chapters this morning. I've given you an outline. Joseph's life falls into 5 different scenes. All right? The first scene is a family feud. It's a family feud. If you want to go to Genesis chapter 37, we're going to run through some verses real quick here. Genesis chapter 37, beginning at verse 2. This is the account of Jacob. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Joseph is 17 when he comes on scene here in this story. He's 17 years old, teenager. All right. Now, what we need to understand when we get to verse 2 is Joseph will have 11 brothers. There were 12 brothers. Jacob was the father of all 12 sons, but they were from 4 different wives. So Jacob's brothers were half-brothers, okay? That's the family dynamic here. Joseph brings back, he's working with his brothers as a shepherd. He brings back a bad report of how they're behaving. Now, I have 3 brothers. I have 1 older than me. I have 2 that are younger than me. And I know how that would have played with me. If my brother, one of my brothers, would have come back bringing a bad report of my behavior to my dad, in my household, we call that tattletaling. It would not have been good. All right. So that's what's going on here. He brings back a bad report about his brothers. He's tattling on them. Verse 3, now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age. Joseph was born. Joseph is Jacob's favorite son after his mother, Rachel, was Jacob's favorite wife. Can you see a pattern here? If you have a favorite wife, guess what you can probably have? Favorite son. And that was Joseph. All right. He made a richly ornamented robe for him. All right. You got that. The coat of many colors, some people call it, whatever you want to, the Technicolor dream coat, whatever you want to call it. He made that for Joseph. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. By the way, parents, guard against favoritism in your family. The siblings will always recognize it. They will always see it. His brothers saw right through this. Dad loves Joseph more than he loves the rest of us. And they hated him. That's what fueled this family feud here. Another thing that we have in place here is Joseph will have 2 dreams. And he goes and he tells his brothers the interpretation of his own dreams that he's dreamed. And basically he tells his brothers, someday you are all going to bow down to me. And he told them that twice. Once again, I got 3 brothers. I know how that would have played. Think about it. Those of you that have brothers, just think if your brother came to you and said, someday you're going to bow to me. And he said it twice. Verse 8 says, they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Verse 11, his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. They hate him for all of these various reasons that led to this family feud. They hate Joseph. And so they put him in a pit. They wanted to kill him, but they decided to just put him in a pit. And then later on in the chapter, they decided that they were going to sell him to some Midianite merchants who were heading to Egypt. And so they bring him up from the pit. And by the way, if you they bring him up from the pit, they sell him to these Midianite merchants. They take him to Egypt, and in verse 36 of chapter 37, meanwhile the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. And so Joseph now, he has been purchased off the auction block by Potiphar. He is now made a slave. His brothers had decided with the Midianite merchants to sell him for 20 pieces of silver, the common price of a slave. And now he's in Egypt, and he's working for Potiphar. Chapter 39, verse 2 says this, "The Lord was with Joseph, and he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in the eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned." This is a leadership position. All right? It's a leadership position. "The Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So he left in Joseph's care everything he had. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except for the food he ate." Think about that. Here's Potiphar, and the only thing he thinks about, the only thing he's got to think about during the course of the day is the order off of the menu. Joseph's covering everything else. All right. But the second scene we have here is a false accusation. Potiphar's wife, because Joseph was well built, verse 6 of chapter 39, Joseph was well built and handsome, and after a while his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." I would call that a rather direct approach. Would you not? Verse 11, "One day he went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants was inside. She caught him by his cloak and said, 'Come to bed with me.' There it is again. But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house." Let me tell you something. That day, Joseph lost his cloak, but he kept his character. And you can replace a cloak. There's false accusation. Because God's hand was upon Joseph, Joseph was promoted by the prison, and he was accused of rape. They put him in prison. Joseph was promoted by the prison warden to be in charge of all the other prisoners. By the way, another leadership position. Another leadership position. He's in prison, and one day there's two officers of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and they did something to offend the king. It doesn't say what they did, but they offended the king. This baker and the butler, the chief cupbearer, they were thrown into the same prison where Joseph was. And these two, they had a dream the same night, and they're looking for somebody to interpret the dream. And Joseph said, "I can't do it, but God's the interpreter of dreams." And so he interprets their dreams. And he tells the baker, "In 3 days, you're going to be executed. You're going to be hung by a tree." But he told the butler, the chief cupbearer, in 3 days, you're going to be returned to your position of being cupbearer before the king. And it happened exactly like that. So Joseph told the cupbearer, "When you get out of here, tell Pharaoh about me so that I can get out of here too. Speak a good word for me, and I'll be able to get out of here." And the next thing we notice, we have a forgetful friend. A forgetful friend. In chapter 40, verse 23, it says, "The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him." Wow. That went on for 2 full years, chapter 41, verse 1 says, for 2 full years, this chief cupbearer forgot all about Joseph until Pharaoh has 2 dreams. And all of a sudden, the cupbearer says to Pharaoh, and by the way, Pharaoh's magicians and, his, the people that did counsel for him, his wise men, they could not interpret the dreams. And all of a sudden, the chief cupbearer remembered Joseph after 2 years, and he said, I remember Joseph, and I had a dream, and he interpreted it, and the baker had a dream, and he interpreted it, and everything worked out just like he interpreted the dreams. Pharaoh said, bring him here. Joseph comes in, and Pharaoh says to Joseph, I had a dream and no one can interpret it, but I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. I cannot do it, Joseph replied to Pharaoh, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. Joseph would not take credit for something that he knew that only God could do, interpret that dream. And so he interprets the dream. I'm not going to go into what the dreams were, but the bottom line on both dreams that Pharaoh had was there's going to be 7 years of abundance, food in abundance, bumper crops for 7 years. But after that 7 years is over, there's going to be a famine. And he says what we need to do is have someone who could oversee a food distribution program and could also bring grain in 1/5 of everything that we now have that's going to be in abundance. We keep 1/5 back for the time that the famines come. And Pharaoh says, I can't think of anybody that could do that better than you, Joseph. You got the job. And Joseph became prime minister. Not bad for someone who went from a pit to Potiphar's house to a prison, and now he's in the palace. Joseph. Because God was with him and made everything that he touched prosper. Everything. Well, there's a famine that was foretold. And then we have a family reunion. We're told that once the famine hit, Joseph's family came from Canaan, came to Egypt to get food. And that family was composed of 70 people who relocated and went to Goshen, all right, just outside of Egypt. Now, that's the quick view of it, all right. We started out with the promise. We had the problems. We had the purpose. Here's the perspective. How many of you think that Joseph had to be very confused by all the circumstances and stuff that was happening to him? He didn't understand it all. He didn't see the way the dots were connected. But God was using those leadership positions to lead him up to being prime minister of Egypt in Potiphar's prison, and just God was putting that all together. I want to read, we're getting toward the end here. Chapter 50, verse 20. This is what Joseph said to his brothers after he had revealed his identity to them. He said this, and by the way, this is the Old Testament version of Romans 8:28, where we started. This is the Old Testament version. And by the way, Joseph didn't have Romans 8:28. All right. But it says this. You intended to harm me, he's saying this to his brothers, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then don't be afraid, I will provide for you and your children. And he reassured them and spoke kindly to them. That's Romans 8:28. You meant evil. That's in all things, God is going to work it together for good. Even that evil. Even all that mistreatment of him. False accusations, everything. God is working behind the scenes to take Joseph exactly where he wants Joseph to be, so that Joseph will do exactly what he wants him to do. That's not just Joseph's story. We serve the God of Joseph today. That is what he is desiring to do in every single one of our lives. And let me say this, but everything had to come together. God had to be working it together for good. All these things. You see, at just the right moment, his brothers threw him into the pit. At just the right moment, the Midianite merchants came along. At just the right moment, Joseph was sold to Potiphar in Egypt. At just the right moment, Potiphar's wife falsely accused him. At just the right moment, he met the baker and the cupbearer. At just the right moment, the cupbearer remembered Joseph. At just the right moment, Pharaoh called for him. At just the right moment, he was promoted to prime minister. At just the right moment, Jacob sent his sons to Egypt. At just the right moment, the brothers met Joseph. At just the right moment, Jacob's family moved to Egypt. At just the right moment, Pharaoh offered them the land of Goshen. At just the right moment, they settled there and the family prospered. That's God orchestrating the events of Joseph's life. And never forget, he is orchestrating the events of your life too. You may not always see it. You may be going through a pit situation. You may be going through a prison situation, these difficult things, and you're trying to figure out, let me give you my philosophy of life and then I'll be done. I like to do puzzles. Do we have any people here that like to put together puzzles? All right. Especially in the wintertime. I like to do puzzles. How many of you realize life is, and it resembles a puzzle? You see, we have a lot of different pieces in our life that are scattered. And we go about life, the Bible says we see through a glass darkly. We see, the NIV says we see but a poor reflection in a mirror. We see in part, we know in part, we see in part, but someday we're going to see face to face. 1 Corinthians 13:12 tells us that. But until that time, here's the way we go through life. We go through life as children who are trying to put together a puzzle, and they've lost the picture on the box. This is the best analogy I can think of. You see, we got all these, this is a 1,000-piece puzzle of the sunrise, and we're trying to fit these pieces together, but the problem is we don't see the picture. How many of you know it would be really difficult to put together a puzzle without having the picture? God sees the picture. We may not always understand what is happening around us, but like Joseph, we can rest confidently in the fact that the Lord is in complete control. He does not make mistakes. You can trust Him with the details of your life.